The last train out of Lost Cause, a mist-shrouded town nestled deep in the Orike woods, was an old, creaking beast of iron and steam. They called it the Iron Bull for its eerie whistle that echoed through the woods at night. For most, it was a lifeline to civilization. For me, Jude Harvey, it was my last chance to leave this cursed place behind. As I boarded the train, dragging my scuffed duffel bag behind me, the faint glow of the station lamps barely pierced the swirling fog. The platform was nearly deserted, save for a few haggard travelers. My uncle, Olson, an eccentric historian who had taken me in after my parents disappeared years ago, sat in one of the seats near the back, poring over a worn leather-bound book. "You made it," he said without looking up. "I was starting to think the hell would leave without you." I almost turned back, I admitted, sliding into the seat beside him. "This place, it feels like it's alive, like it doesn't want us to leave." Uncle Olson's face darkened, and he closed the book. "You're not entirely wrong. There are old stories about the Orike woods, stories about things that guard the forest, things that don't take kindly to trespassers." Before I could press him further, the train gave a lurch, and the conductor's voice crackled over the intercom. "Next stop, Black Hollow Station. Tickets, please." It wasn't long before I started to feel uneasy. The rhythmic clatter of the train wheels seemed to grow uneven, like something was disrupting the motion. Uncle Olson was dozing lightly, the book resting on his chest. I glanced out the window, but the darkness was so complete that it felt as though the train was moving through a void. Then, it began, a faint scratching noise, like nails on metal. At first I thought it was the wind, but as the sound grew louder, I realized it was coming from the roof. "Uncle Olson," I whispered, shaking his shoulder. He stirred and frowned. "What is it, Jew?" "Listen," I said. He tilted his head, his expression shifting from annoyance to concern. The scratching stopped abruptly, replaced by a low, guttural growl that reverberated through the train wagon. "What on earth?" Olson started, but before he could finish, the lights flickered, plunging us into brief darkness. When they came back on, the wagon felt colder, the air heavy with an unnatural stillness. A shadow moved at the far end of the aisle. It was massive, its shape barely discernible in the dim light. A creature, impossibly tall and gangly, with limbs that seemed to stretch unnaturally. Its face, or what should have been its face, was a twisted mockery of a human visage, with two glowing, ember-like eyes and a mouth that emitted a faint metallic screech. I froze. Uncle Olson grabbed my arm. "Don't move," he hissed. The creature tilted its head, as if sensing us. Then it let out a sound, a piercing, mechanical wail that set my teeth on edge. "Right!" Uncle Olson shouted, pulling me toward the next wagon. We stumbled through the connecting door, slamming it shut behind us. The creature's claws raked against the glass, leaving deep gouges. "What is that thing?" I gasped. Uncle Olson's face was pale. "It's what the old stories warned about, the Iron Stalker. It said to hunt those who tried to escape the veil." I didn't think it was real. We weren't alone in the next wagon. A young woman with auburn hair and sharp, determined eyes stood near the door, holding what looked like an antique lantern. "You saw it, didn't you?" she asked, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. "Who are you?" Uncle Olson demanded. "Holly Watts, an investigator," she replied. "I've been tracking this train for weeks. It's not just the Iron Stalker. There's something wrong with this entire railway. People vanish. Time bends. You're lucky to have made it this far." The train shuddered violently, nearly throwing us off our feet. The lights flickered again, and the stalker's wail echoed through the wagons. Holly handed me the lantern. "This might keep it at bay for a while, but we need to find a way off this train before it derails or worse." Armed with the lantern, we made our way toward the front of the train. The creature was relentless, its inhuman growls and wails growing louder as it pursued us. When we reached the engine wagon, the conductor, a gaunt man with hollow eyes, was waiting for us. He looked startled to see us, but quickly composed himself. "You shouldn't be here," he said, his voice low and strained. "We don't have a choice," Holly said. "We need to stop this train. The conductor hesitated, then sighed. You don't understand. It's a gateway, a prison for things that should never be released. Before we could respond, the stalker's claws tore through the door behind us. The conductor grabbed a lever, and the train's whistle let out a deafening howl. The creature recoiled, its ember eyes flaring with rage. With the conductor's help, we activated the emergency brakes. The train screeched and groaned as it slowed, the stalker's wails growing more desperate. The lantern flickered ominously in my hand. "Chill!" Uncle Olson shouted. "Hold it steady. Untry." I yelled back. The train finally came to a halt in a clearing bathed in pale moonlight. The creature stood at the edge of the woods, its form flickering like a mirage. For a moment, it seemed to hesitate, as if bound by some unseen force. The conductor turned to us. "This is your only chance. Run and don't look back." We didn't need to be told twice. As we stumbled into the forest, the iron bull let out one final whistle, and the train began to fade, taking the stalker with it. Holly looked back, her expression a mix of relief and sorrow. "It's not over. The howl will return, and so will the stalker. But at least we're free for now." Uncle Olson nodded grimly. "Lost cause may be behind us, but the Vale has a long memory." As we made our way out of the woods, the first rays of dawn broke through the mist, illuminating a world that suddenly felt a little less threatening. But in my heart, I knew the Iron Bull would always haunt my dreams. 2 weeks had passed since we left Lost Cause. Uncle Olson and I had settled in a small town miles away, trying to start fresh. "I've been hearing it again," I told Olson one evening. He looked up from his book, a heavy frown creasing his face. "Hearing what?" "The whistle. At night. It's faint, but it's there. You're just shaken from what happened. Give it time." I wanted to believe him, but something told me this wasn't over. Holly's lantern sat on my bedside table, untouched since the night we fled the train. Its once bright glow had dimmed, the glass fogged over as if hiding secrets. That night, as I lay in bed, the lantern flickered to life. The soft, golden light cast eerie shadows on the walls, and a low hum filled the room. "Olson," I called, scrambling out of bed. He rushed in, his face pale. "What's happening?" The lantern vibrated violently, the hum growing louder until it morphed into a haunting, familiar whistle. The Iron Bull's whistle. Before I could speak, the light extinguished, plunging the room into darkness. "We need to go," Olson said, his voice trembling. "To where?" "To wherever this thing wants us to." The lantern became our guide. It flared to life again the next evening, pulsing like a heartbeat. Each flicker pointed us toward the woods outside town. Olson and I packed hastily, unsure of what we were walking into. As we ventured deeper into the forest, the mist returned, thick and suffocating. After hours of trekking, we stumbled upon an abandoned train station. The platform was overgrown with ivy, and the air was heavy with decay. A rusted sign above the entrance read Hollow Junction. "This place isn't on any map," Olson murmured. As we stepped onto the platform, the lantern's glow intensified, illuminating a set of tracks that disappeared into the mist. A chill ran down my spine. "They're coming back," I whispered. We weren't alone. Figures began to emerge from the mist. Men, women, and children, their faces pale and eyes hollow. They moved silently, their footsteps eerily synchronized as they boarded the spectral train that appeared on the tracks. "They're not alive," Olson said, his voice barely audible. The Iron Bull had returned, its whistle piercing the night like a lament for lost souls. But this time it wasn't hunting us. "They're passengers," I realized. Holly appeared suddenly, stepping out of the shadows. Her auburn hair was disheveled, and her expression was grim. "You came," she said, her tone more resigned than relieved. "Holly," Olson asked. "How did you—" "No time to explain," she interrupted. "It's worse than I thought. The train isn't just a gateway. It's a trap, and we're all part of it now." Holly led us to the engine wagon, where the conductor's ghostly figure sat, staring blankly ahead. His hollow eyes locked onto me as we entered. "You shouldn't be here," he rasped. "We didn't have a choice," Holly snapped. "You've bound us to this thing, and we deserve answers." The conductor sighed, his form flickering like a dying flame. "The Iron Bull is cursed to wagonry the souls of the lost. Those who board can never leave. Not truly. The Stalker ensures the balance is maintained." "Then why bring us back?" I demanded. "Because you disrupted the cycle," he said. "The Stalker won't rest until it's corrected." The conductor revealed that the Iron Bull wasn't merely a bridge between worlds. It was a prison containing something far worse than the Stalker. "There's a rift," he said, "a tear between dimensions that the train was built to guard. If it opens completely, it will consume everything." Holly shook her head. "That doesn't explain why we're here." "You're here to fix it," the conductor replied. The lantern flared brighter, and the train shuddered violently. The Stalker's guttural growl echoed through the wagons, closer than ever. "It's coming," Holly said, drawing a long, ornate dagger from her back. "What's that?" I asked. "Insurance," she replied grimly. The Stalker burst into the engine wagon, its metallic frame glinting in the lantern's light. Its ember eyes locked onto me, and I felt an icy grip around my chest. "Stay behind me," Holly ordered, brandishing the dagger. The Stalker lunged, its claws raking through the air. Holly dodged, slashing at its arm. Sparks flew as the blade made contact, and the creature let out a bone-rattling screech. "Get to the rift," she shouted. Olsen and I ran toward the back of the train, where a swirling vortex of light and shadow had appeared. It pulsed with chaotic energy, threatening to consume the train. "What do we do?" I yelled over the roar. "Use the lantern," Olsen said. I held the lantern up to the rift, its light intensifying. The vortex began to shrink, but the Stalker was closing in fast. Holly appeared beside me, bloody but determined. "You have to seal it," she said. "Don't." "By letting go." Before I could ask what she meant, she grabbed the lantern and hurled herself into the rift. A blinding light erupted, and the Stalker let out one final, anguished wail before vanishing. When the light faded, the train was gone, and the tracks were overgrown with moss. "She's gone," I said, my voice hollow. "She saved us," Olsen replied. The lantern, lifeless on my shelf, felt more like a swaggin than a souvenir. Every time I looked at it, Holly's final words echoed in my mind. By letting go, what had she meant? Had she truly ended the curse? Or had she only delayed the inevitable? Olsen noticed my obsession growing. "You're staring at it again," he said one evening. "I can't stop thinking about her," I admitted. "About what she did. About the train. She made her choice, Jude. It's over." But it didn't feel over. Something about the lantern still pulled at me, like it held a piece of Holly, or a piece of a train. That night, I made up my mind. If the Iron Bull had more to say, I would listen. The first step was returning to Hollow Junction. Olsen was against it, of course. "You want to go back?" he asked, incredulous. "After everything we've been through? I have to know," I said. Reluctantly, he agreed to join me. We left just before dusk, lantern in hand, and followed the same path through the woods. The mist greeted us like an old adversary, curling around our legs and chilling the air. When we arrived at the abandoned platform, the tracks were as empty as before. But this time, the lantern began to glow. "It's reacting," Olsen whispered. The whistle sounded, faint and mournful, and the air shimmered like a mirage. Slowly, the Iron Bull materialized, its rusted frame groaning under the weight of its spectral passengers. "It's here," I said, my voice trembling. We didn't board the train immediately. Instead, we stood frozen as the passengers filed out, their ghostly forms more vivid than before. One of them, a frail-looking woman with a shawl, approached us. "Help us," she murmured, her voice thin as paper. "What do you mean?" I asked. "We're bound to this train," she said. "But we don't belong here. Not all of us." Olsen and I exchanged uneasy glances. "Why can't you leave?" "The Stalker. It keeps us tethered. And now that it's gone..." Her voice trailed off, but her meaning was clear. Without the stalker, the passengers had no anchor. They were drifting, caught between life and death. "Jude," Olsen said, his tone warning, "this isn't our problem." But it was. Holly's sacrifice had saved us, but it had left these souls in limbo. We decided to board the Iron Bull one last time. The engine wagon was just as I remembered it. Dark, cold, and suffused with an unearthly hum. The conductor's ghostly form was waiting for us. "You shouldn't have come back," he said. "Holly's gone," I said. "The stalker's gone, but the train is still here, and so are the passengers." The conductor sighed, his translucent face lined with regret. "The train is more than a machine. It's alive in its way. It's tied to the rift. As long as that tear exists, the Iron Bull will remain." "How do we fix it?" I asked. "You can't fix what's already broken," he said, "but you can choose how it ends." He stepped aside, revealing a lever near the controls. "This will sever the train's connection to the rift. But be warned, it will take everything with it. The passengers, the train, and anyone aboard." We had a choice. Leave the train and its passengers to their fate, or take the risk of severing the connection. "We can't just walk away," I said. "And we can't sacrifice ourselves," Olsen argued. "Jude, think about this." But I wasn't thinking about myself. I was thinking about Holly, about the lives she had saved and the hope she had given me. "We'll find another way," I said. "There has to be one." The conductor watched silently as I turned the lantern over in my hands. Its light was dim, but it pulsed faintly, as if responding to my thoughts. "What if we use the lantern?" I asked. The conductor's eyes widened. "That might work, but it will require great sacrifice." We worked quickly, guided by the conductor's instructions. The lantern would act as a bridge, drawing the passengers' souls away from the train and toward peace. But it needed a source of energy, something powerful enough to sustain the transfer. "It has to be one of us," the conductor said, "a living soul to guide the way." Olsen immediately shook his head. "No, absolutely not. I'll do it," I said, before he could protest further. "It's the only way," I said firmly. "Holly gave her life to save us. Now it's my turn to save them." Olsen's eyes were wet with unshed tears, but he didn't argue. The passengers gathered around as I held the lantern high. Its light grew brighter, enveloping the train in a golden glow. I could feel its energy pulling at me, tugging at the edges of my consciousness. "Thank you," the frail woman said, her face softening as she faded into the light. One by one, the passengers vanished, their forms dissolving like mist. The train groaned, its frame shuddering as the connection to the rift weakened. "Jude," Olsen called. "Come back." I wanted to, but the lantern had other plans. Its light consumed me, filling me with a warmth that was both comforting and overwhelming. Even after the Iron Bull vanished, its shadow lingered in my life. Nights were the hardest, silent and still, but heavy with a sense of waiting. The forest seemed different too, as if it held its breath whenever I walked its trails. Olsen stayed close, though he didn't say much about what we'd been through. I think he hoped silence would make it easier to forget. But forgetting wasn't an option for me. Not with Holly's sacrifice etched into my memory. I began to dream of the train. At first, the dreams were fragmented. Flashes of the lantern, the whistle, Polly's voice. But over time, they grew clearer, more insistent. One night, I woke to the sound of a whistle, faint and far off. When I looked out the window, the forest was glowing faintly, as if lit by ghostly lanterns. I didn't tell Olsen about the dreams or the glow. He'd been through enough. Instead, I ventured into the woods alone, following the faint light. It led me to the place where Hollow Junction had once been. The tracks were gone, as Olsen had said, but the ground was marked with strange symbols, faint and glowing. They looked like runes, though I didn't recognize them. I knelt to examine one, and the moment my fingers touched it, a voice filled my mind. "Jude," it whispered, a chorus of many voices. I pulled back, my heart racing. The glow intensified, and the symbols began to shift. forming a path deeper into the woods. Against my better judgment, I followed. The path led to a clearing I'd never seen before. At its center stood a single iron rail, upright like a monolith. It pulsed with a dim, crimson light. As I approached, a now guttural sound filled the air. It was the stalker's growl, or something like it. The sound wasn't external. It resonated inside me, shaking my bones. "Who's there?" I called, my voice trembling. The growl deepened, and the rail began to twist, forming an archway. Through it, I glimpsed a distorted landscape. The Iron Bull, but not as I remembered it. The train was fractured, its pieces suspended in midair, connected by strands of glowing energy. Then I saw it, a figure, shrouded in darkness, standing at the center of the chaos. It wasn't a stalker, but something worse. Before I could step through the archway, a hand gripped my shoulder. I spun around to see an old man, his face lined with age and worry. "You shouldn't be here," he said. "Who are you?" I asked. "Call me Cody," he said. "I've been watching this place for a long time, ever since the Iron Bull first appeared." "What is it?" Cody sighed, his gaze fixed on the archway. A doorway. The train wasn't just a curse, it was a bridge between worlds. And now, something's trying to cross. Cody explained that the Iron Bull's disappearance hadn't closed the rift entirely. Instead, it had created a weak point, a tear in the fabric of reality. The stalker wasn't the worst thing out there, he said. It was just the first to slip through. And the figure I saw? Cody's expression darkened. "I don't know what it is, but if it gets through, it won't just haunt a few unlucky souls. It'll spread. We have to stop it," I said. Cody nodded. "But we'll need more than courage. We'll need the lantern." Back in my cabin, Olsen was waiting for me, pacing nervously. "Where have you been?" he demanded. "There's something I need to tell you," I said. Olsen listened as I recounted my encounter with Cody and the archway. To my surprise, he didn't argue or call me crazy. "If this thing is as dangerous as you say, we'll need help," he said. Cody joined us the next day, bringing a wealth of knowledge about the rift and his connection to the train. Together, we began preparing for what felt like an impossible task, closing the rift for good. Cody's plan involved using the lantern to draw the entity into the archway and sealing it there. But the process required a ritual, one that would take us to the edge of the rift. The night of the ritual, we returned to the clearing. Cody set up an array of symbols around the archway, their glow casting eerie shadows. The growling intensified as we worked, and the figure in the rift grew clearer. It was massive, its form shifting constantly, as if it couldn't decide what shape to take. When the symbols were complete, Cody handed me the lantern. "You'll need to activate it," he said. "Devil, by letting it take a piece of you." The lantern's light grew brighter as I held it, and I felt a pull, like it was drawing something out of me. Memories surfaced, Holly, the passengers, the stalker, and with them, a wave of emotion so intense it left me gasping. "You're doing it," Cody said. "Keep going." The figure in the rift roared, its shadowy form lunging toward the archway. The lantern's light met it, holding it back, but the strain was immense. "I can't." "Yes, you can," Olsen shouted. With one final surge of will, I focused everything I had on the lantern. Its light erupted, blinding and pure, and the figure's roar turned to a wail. When I woke, the clearing was empty. The archway was gone, and the forest was silent. Cody and Olsen were beside me, their faces etched with relief and exhaustion. "It's over," Cody said. The lantern was still in my hand, but its light was faint, a mere flicker. I felt lighter, as if a weight I hadn't realized I was wagoning had been lifted. Back in town, life slowly returned to normal. The dream stopped, and the forest seemed to breathe again. But every now and then, I'd catch a faint whistle on the wind and wonder, had we truly closed the rift, or had we only bought time?